When Mom said Josh was special, I was a teenager and didn't understand how much that word would shape the rest of my life. I was 19 when she handed me a stack of papers and said it was for insurance. I didn't read them. I trusted her. Over the years, I paid for her medication, for Josh's rehab, for the roof that leaked every spring. Every time she called, it was the same words: "You're strong, you'll manage." And so I did. Then one day, a letter arrived from a notary. The house, the accounts, the life insurance, everything was in Josh's name. Not in Ted's, not in hers, only his. And me? I wasn't even a footnote. I had been erased from the paper, the same way I had been slowly erased from their lives. But what I didn't know yet was that the most important signature of my life wouldn't be the one I gave away without reading. It would be the one I used to cancel an automatic payment. The letter came on a dull gray Tuesday. I had just gotten home from work, tossed my coat over the chair, and saw the envelope stamped with the seal of El Paso County. At first, I thought it was a mistake, or some kind of junk mail, but it wasn't. With every line I read, it felt like I was being written out of a life I had worked so hard to stay part of. I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska. Every fall smelled like apples and cinnamon. Our kitchen was small, but it always felt warm. On Sundays, Dad would make his famous apple pies, and he always let me help. He'd peel the apples while I mixed the cinnamon and sugar, and we'd laugh at how bad I was at rolling dough. Mom would turn up the old radio and dance barefoot on the tile floor, humming along to songs she half remembered. It was simple, but it was happy. I remember the day it changed. Dad came home early from work. He looked pale, said he felt dizzy, and sat down with a hand on his chest. An hour later, I was sitting in a cold waiting room while a nurse tried to find someone to talk to my mom. He died that night. Heart attack. Sudden and final. After that, the kitchen got quiet. The radio stayed off. The smell of cinnamon faded into dust. We still ate, but the food came from boxes and the table felt too big. For a long time, Mom didn't say much. She went to work, came home, and stared at the TV. I got used to eating alone. I washed dishes without being asked. I did my homework with no one checking. I think she forgot I was there. A year passed before she started smiling again. That's when she met Ted. He came over to fix the sink and stayed for dinner. Then he stayed the night. Then he moved in. He was quiet, always smelled like oil and old leather, and worked long hours at the local repair shop. He didn't talk much, but he nodded at me politely. That was more than Mom did. She started cooking again after Ted moved in. Not pies, just regular meals. Frozen vegetables, sometimes meatloaf. She laughed at his jokes, and she started calling me sweetie again. I thought maybe we were coming back to something normal. Then she sat me down at the kitchen table one evening and told me she was pregnant. She was glowing, like the sun came out just for her. I was 8. I smiled and clapped my hands like I thought I was supposed to. But deep down, something sank in my chest. When Josh was born, everything shifted again. I remember Mom holding him like the whole world fit in her arms. She called him her miracle. She said God had given her a second chance. Everyone in the neighborhood came to see the baby. I stood in the corner, watching. I held his tiny fingers once. He gripped me so tight, I almost cried. Mom quit her job soon after, said she needed to stay home for his development, that babies need full attention to grow into their best selves. I wanted to ask if I hadn't needed that too, but I knew the answer, so I said nothing. From then on, it was all about Josh, his sleep schedule, his food allergies, his development charts. If I spoke, Mom didn't always hear me. If I asked for something, it got postponed or forgotten. There were nights she forgot to pack my lunch for school. And when I told her, she just looked up and said, "Oh, honey, I was so busy with Josh's doctor appointment today. I'm sorry." But she didn't really look sorry. She was already turning back to him. This became our new routine. I woke up by myself, walked to school, did my homework alone, ate leftovers if there were any. Sometimes Ted would bring home extra dinner from the shop, and I'd eat it cold, standing at the counter. Nobody asked me about my day. Josh cried a lot. And when he wasn't crying, Mom was reading books on childhood psychology or filling out forms for toddler gymnastics. She took him to music classes, play therapy, swimming lessons. He didn't like any of them. He liked to throw food and scream, but Mom called it emotional expression. Ted watched everything in silence. Sometimes I caught him frowning as he watched Mom fuss over Josh. Once, while I was sitting at the table doing my homework, Ted came over and helped me with a math problem. His hands were rough and smelled like grease, but he was patient. That small moment stuck with me for days. Still, I didn't blame Josh. He was just a baby. He didn't choose to be the sun in someone's universe, but I started to disappear. Not just in the house, but in my own heart. I became smaller, quieter. I stopped asking for things. As Josh got older, the favoritism got louder. Mom posted every moment of his life online. First step, first word, first painting. She called him my genius. She said he was sensitive, gifted, special. I got a B+ in math and left the report card on the fridge. No one noticed. By the time I was 12, I cooked my own breakfast. I walked Josh to daycare. I cleaned the kitchen after dinner. Mom said, "You're such a help," but it didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like a job. The house was full of toys and baby gear, but not a single thing with my name on it. Josh had a room filled with books, puzzles, and glow-in-the-dark stars. My room had old furniture and a broken lamp. Ted fixed the lamp once, quietly. No one said anything. Birthdays were the hardest. Josh's parties were full of balloons, themes, and neighborhood kids. Mine were a store-bought cake and maybe a card, if someone remembered. One year, they forgot completely. I didn't say anything. I went to bed early and pretended to sleep. Sometimes I made apple pie, just like Dad did. I'd peel the apples slowly, measure the cinnamon exactly the way he taught me. I'd eat a slice at night, standing alone in the kitchen, listening to the silence. I think it was my way of keeping him close. I knew I wasn't loved the same way. I knew it in the way Mom brushed Josh's hair every morning, but never noticed when mine got tangled. I knew it in the way she kissed his forehead when he fell and asked me why I was so dramatic when I scraped my knee. I knew it when she said, "Josh needs me," and never once asked what I needed. And so I adapted. I kept my voice down. I became easy, invisible, helpful. I stopped needing. But deep inside, in a place I didn't show, something waited, a quiet knowing, a tiny spark that remembered what it felt like to be wanted. It flickered every time I saw Ted watching me with that silent frown, every time I tasted cinnamon, every time I caught myself wishing for someone to ask how my day was. And though I didn't understand it then, that little spark would one day grow into something strong enough to change everything. Because no matter how quiet I became, I was still there. And one day, I'd be loud in my own way. When I was 19, I worked at a small diner just off the highway. I wore a pale green apron with my name on it and spent my shifts refilling coffee, wiping counters, and hoping for good tips. Most nights, I came home smelling like grease and old fries. I wasn't in college yet. I was saving up. Every dollar went into a jar on my dresser, marked with black marker, Marshall. That was the name of the university I wanted to go to in West Virginia. It wasn't fancy, but it was far enough away. I dreamed of a small dorm, a library card, silence I didn't have to fight for. One night, after a long shift, I was counting my tips at the kitchen table. It was almost midnight. I had made $73 and some change. I was tired, my feet hurt, and I just wanted a shower. That's when Mom walked in. She was already in her robe, holding a folder. She said it was for insurance and needed my signature. I didn't ask questions. I didn't read it. She was my mom. I signed, and she kissed my head and went to bed. It was just a signature. A fast one. Barely more than a scribble. But now looking back, I think that was the day everything was taken from me. My name was still mine, but not much else was. After that, life didn't slow down. Josh broke his arm at 14 skateboarding down the front porch rail. Mom panicked and cried and said the ambulance ride was too expensive. I covered the bill. $920. I used part of the college fund, thinking I could replace it soon. Then Mom got into a car accident during a grocery run. She wasn't badly hurt, just shaken. The front bumper was gone, the left side dented in. Ted had left by then, and there was no one else to help. So I pulled out my emergency savings and paid for the repairs. Later that winter, the roof started leaking in 3 places. Rainwater dripped into the living room. Josh refused to move his gaming chair, so I put down a bucket and called a contractor. I bought shingles from Home Depot and covered the installation. That time it was almost $1,000. I didn't think twice. It was just what I did. Every time something went wrong, they called me. Every time they needed groceries, pills, repairs, bills, my phone lit up, and every time I paid. Not because I was rich, I wasn't. I lived in a studio apartment with peeling paint and a noisy fridge. But I had a job. I had discipline. And I knew how to stretch $20. I never asked for thanks. I got used to hearing the same sentence from Mom over and over. She said it like a prayer. You're strong. You can handle it. I don't know when it became my role in the family, but somewhere along the way, I turned into the one who carried everything. Quietly. Without applause. Josh was never asked to help. Even when he turned 18, when he could have picked up part-time work, Mom said he was still figuring himself out. She said he had anxiety, that he wasn't like other boys. I wanted to ask what that made me, but I never did. I just nodded and said I understood. There were times I cried in the shower, not loudly, just quiet tears that no one would hear. I was tired, always tired, but I didn't know how to stop. I kept thinking that if I did enough, if I gave enough, someday Mom would look at me the way she looked at Josh. That never happened. One year, I forgot my own birthday. I was at work when a coworker gave me a cupcake with a candle. She had seen my ID earlier that week and remembered. I sat in the break room and cried while pretending it was because the frosting was too sweet. Mom didn't call that day. Neither did Josh. I told myself they were busy. I started taking freelance gigs at night, copywriting, proofreading, anything I could do from my laptop to make a little extra. I had a dream of moving to a better apartment, one with a balcony, maybe, and space for books. But every time I got close, something pulled me back. A medical bill, a car repair, a phone call. Mom said Josh needed therapy. I paid. Then she said she needed dental work. I paid. Then Josh lost his phone and needed a new one for mental health reasons. I paid. Some months, I barely made rent. I skipped meals, sold my old iPad. Once, I pawned a necklace Dad gave me when I was little, a tiny gold locket with a scratched heart. I needed the cash. I told myself I'd buy it back. I never did. Still, I kept going. Because I believed that families helped each other, that this was temporary, that love was about sacrifice, that one day, maybe when Josh got a job or Mom felt better, they'd say thank you. That never came. There was a part of me that still saw myself as that 8-year-old girl, waiting at the top of the stairs, listening to laughter coming from the kitchen below, hoping someone would call her down to join, hoping her name would be said with the same warmth. Instead, I heard my name only when something was needed. My name became a transaction, a way to open a bank account, a signature on a bill, a line on a receipt. Years passed this way. I forgot how to expect anything for myself. I stopped thinking about birthdays, vacations, new clothes. Everything was temporary. My needs could wait. But deep down, something else was growing. Not anger. Not yet. Just a slow awareness. A feeling like maybe I had given too much, too early, and that no one had ever really stopped to see how much it was costing me. I didn't know it yet, but that feeling would change everything, because you can only carry the weight for so long before something breaks. And I was getting close. After college, I moved to Colorado Springs. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like a fresh start. I found a small apartment on the edge of town, the kind where the windows rattled when it was windy, and the heater took forever to kick in. Still, it was mine. I bought secondhand furniture, a mismatched set of dishes, and a soft beige rug that I loved even though it always collected dust. I hung string lights over my bed and called it home. I got a job at a real estate agency. Mostly I worked behind a desk, answering phones, scheduling showings, and learning how to talk to people about square footage in neighborhoods I couldn't afford to live in. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady. I budgeted carefully. Rent, groceries, bus pass, utilities. I made it work. Every month, without fail, I sent my mom $900. I set it as an automatic transfer so I wouldn't forget. Sometimes it stung, especially when my own bank balance dropped into the double digits, but I told myself it was the right thing to do. Families help each other. That's what I believed. Sometimes Mom would call and tell me Josh was having another panic attack. She said he needed therapy, but the insurance only covered so much. Other times it was the mortgage. She said they were falling behind again, or Josh had lost another job. He tried, she said. The world just didn't understand him. He was sensitive. He needed time. And she always added, "You understand, don't you?" I said I did, and maybe I did. Or maybe I just didn't want to argue anymore. Holidays were the hardest. I'd take the bus home with a bag full of groceries I couldn't really afford. I always brought something: vitamins for Mom, thermal socks for Josh, frozen meals, shampoo, whatever I thought they might need but wouldn't buy. I'd walk into the house, drop my bags, and realize it still smelled the same. A mix of old laundry, cooking oil, and the faint scent of lemon cleaner that never seemed to cut through the must. Josh rarely came out of his room. If he did, he barely looked at me. He wore the same worn hoodie every time, hood pulled low, earbuds in. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes not. I'd ask how he was doing and get a shrug. Mom would answer for him, say he was focusing on his healing. That word again, healing, like it was a full-time job. I spent most of those visits cleaning. The sink was always full, the trash never taken out, light bulbs burned out, a cabinet door loose. I'd roll up my sleeves, scrub, tighten, sweep. It was like trying to patch up something that didn't want to be fixed. Still, I did it. Out of habit, out of guilt, out of love. I'm not sure anymore. There was always something broken. The water heater, the internet router, the bathroom fan. Mom said Josh didn't know how to handle that kind of stuff. He was too anxious, and besides, he was working on finding direction. That was her phrase. Finding direction. I don't think he ever left the house. Sometimes I stayed in my old room, but it had turned into storage. Boxes of toys, old linens, unopened Amazon packages. I usually ended up on the couch. The cushions were lumpy and the springs poked through, but at least it was quiet after everyone went to bed. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep living two lives. One where I was trying to build something of my own, and one where I was forever tethered to a house that no longer felt like home. My friends didn't understand. They'd ask why I didn't just stop sending money, why I didn't say no. But it's hard to explain what it feels like to be the one everyone relies on, the one who always says yes. It becomes part of your identity. You stop asking what you want. You just react. You survive. At work, I was the reliable one, the one who always stayed late, the one who covered shifts. My boss once told me I was the backbone of the office. I smiled and said thank you. But inside, I felt hollow, like no matter how much I did, it would never be enough. Once I got a small raise, 25 cents more an hour, I thought about keeping it to myself, using it to buy a new coat or a nice meal. But then Mom called. Josh needed new medication. The side effects from the last one were too harsh. I adjusted my budget again, bought a used coat at Goodwill, ate rice for dinner all week. Sometimes I let myself imagine what life could look like without the monthly transfer. $900. That's what I paid every month. Almost $11,000 a year. I could have saved for a car, taken a class, traveled somewhere, bought a real bed instead of a mattress on the floor. But those were just thoughts. Passing clouds, they never landed. I started feeling tired all the time. A different kind of tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much. Emotional weight, unspoken expectations, years of it. My shoulders ached, my chest felt tight. I cried more, though never in front of anyone. The worst part wasn't the money, it was the silence. Not once did Mom say thank you. Not once did Josh. The calls came when they needed something. The texts were always requests. I started to wonder if I disappeared, would they even notice? Or just find someone else to take my place? But I kept going, because that's what I did. That's who I was. Until one day I opened my bank app and stared at the outgoing transfer, $900, again. I looked around my tiny apartment, walls peeling, heater broken, empty fridge, and something inside me cracked. It wasn't anger, not yet, but it was the beginning of something I didn't know I had the right to feel. Something that sounded like a whisper in the back of my mind. What if I stopped? The letter came in the middle of a workday. It was spring, and I was sitting at my desk, sipping lukewarm coffee and sorting through emails about property listings. I almost didn't notice the envelope at first. It looked like junk mail, plain, cream-colored, with my name typed neatly on the front. I tore it open without much thought, expecting some generic offer or maybe paperwork I'd forgotten to request. But inside was a short letter from a notary office in Lincoln. As I read it, the words didn't fully register. My eyes moved over them like they belonged to someone else's life. The house, left to Josh. The savings accounts, transferred to Josh. The life insurance, Josh again. Every sentence repeated the same name like a drumbeat. And my name? It wasn't there. Not in the body, not in the notes, not even as a mention of exclusion. It was like I had never existed. At first, I thought there had been a mistake. I reread the letter slowly, tracing the lines with my finger. I checked the return address. I even flipped it over, as if something would be hidden on the back. But it was all there in plain language. A will had been prepared, signed, and filed. My mother had legally passed everything, every single thing, to my brother. I sat there in silence, the hum of the office around me suddenly feeling too loud. Phones ringing, chairs squeaking, printers buzzing. My hands felt cold. I put the letter back in the envelope and slid it into my bag. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I just knew I had to breathe and not cry at my desk. That evening, I paced around my apartment, rereading the letter until the paper started to soften at the folds. I stared at it as if it might suddenly say something different, something that made sense. Then I called my mom. I didn't plan what I was going to say. I just asked if it was true. She sounded calm, almost bored, like I had asked her whether it would rain tomorrow. She said Josh needed support. He had been through so much. He had his struggles. I asked about me, where I fit into the picture. She said I was an adult, I was strong. I always figured things out. And that was that. No apology, no explanation beyond the same lines I had heard all my life. He needs more. You'll be fine. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. My apartment felt smaller than ever. The light from the kitchen buzzed faintly, and the fridge made its usual clicking noise before it cooled. I listened to those sounds and tried to understand what it meant to be erased. I had paid bills. I had sent money. I had patched holes in their walls and bought medicine when Mom was sick. I had skipped meals, delayed repairs, passed on vacations, all to help keep that house running. And now, it wasn't mine. It never had been, not really. I just hadn't let myself see it. It was like realizing I had been standing outside the house the entire time, pressing my face to the window, thinking I was inside. I started thinking back to all the times I had been asked to help. Josh needed a new mattress. Josh needed a special tutor. Josh had lost his job again and needed help with rent. Mom said she was drowning in bills. I sent what I could. I always said yes. And now she had looked at everything she owned, every piece of her life, and said, "Give it to Josh." Not out of hate for me. I didn't even believe she hated me. It was worse than that. It was indifference. She didn't think I needed anything. She didn't think I mattered in the equation. She just assumed I'd always take care of myself, because I always had. For a few days, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake wondering what else I had missed, what other decisions had been made behind my back while I paid their bills. I remembered signing something years ago. A paper she brought me while I was counting tips. She said it was for insurance. I didn't read it. I trusted her. I wondered if that signature had helped make this possible. If I had, without knowing, helped remove myself. I couldn't stop playing the words over in my head. You'll be fine. Like it was a compliment. Like being capable meant I didn't deserve anything more. I tried to talk to a friend about it. She was kind, but she didn't get it. She said I should hire a lawyer. I should fight. But it wasn't about the house. Not really. It was about what it represented. About being the invisible one for so long that even on paper, I no longer existed. I started questioning everything. If my own mother didn't see me, had anyone ever? Had I really built a life? Or had I just been patching up theirs? I went to work the next day, smiled at clients, answered phones, wrote up listings. I did everything I was supposed to do. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't broken. But I felt something rising, something cold and sharp. Not a scream, not a cry, just a quiet truth. I had spent years pouring into people who never poured back, and now, legally and emotionally, I had nothing to show for it. Not even my name on a line. But the silence inside me was starting to sound different. Less like surrender, more like the start of something new. I stared at the screen of my phone for a long time. The numbers were simple, familiar. $900. That's what it had said every month for the past several years. Right beneath it, the words, "Next payment, April 4." My thumb hovered over the option that said, "Edit payment." I didn't touch it. Not yet. I just stared, like if I looked long enough, it would make sense. Like it would suddenly explain why I had been doing this for so long. $900, month after month, year after year. I thought about what that amount really meant in my life. It was my rent. It was groceries for 6 weeks. It was what I could have put toward a car, a trip, a savings account. But I had sent it always, without hesitation. Not because I had extra. I never had extra. But because my mother needed it. Or at least she said she did. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, room dim with late afternoon light. Everything around me looked a little tired. The curtains I bought from a discount bin. The dent in the wall from when I tried to move the bookshelf alone. The pile of laundry I hadn't folded. And I thought about how little I had kept for myself. I was 14 the first time I cleaned Josh's room for him. He had spilled cereal and thrown clothes everywhere, and Mom was overwhelmed. She asked me to help just that once. I did it quietly. She said thank you and called me a good girl. After that, it became expected. I cleaned his room, packed his bag, reminded him to take his medicine. I became his shadow caretaker. He never noticed. He thought the world just took care of itself. At 22, I bought Mom a new water heater. The old one had finally given out, and the house was freezing. I remember her crying on the phone, saying she didn't know what to do. I used all the money I'd saved for new tires and sent it to her. She called me her angel. That heater lasted 5 years. By then, I'd paid for half the repairs in the house, but no one called it mine. At 28, we had the conversation that stayed with me more than anything else. I don't remember what started it. Probably money, probably Josh, but I remember her voice, so calm, so matter of fact. She said love couldn't be divided equally, that some people simply needed more. She said Josh was one of those people. And well, I was strong. I always had been. I could take care of myself. I didn't need as much. That was the story I had been told my whole life, that I was the one who could handle it, that I was the backup plan, the steady one, the helper. I had worn that identity like a uniform, and I didn't even realize how heavy it had become. Now I sat here, at 31, still paying for everyone else's life while my own sat on hold. Still waiting for a thank you that never came. Still sending money out of habit, out of guilt, out of fear that saying no would make me a bad daughter, a bad sister, a bad person. I looked at the phone again. The screen was starting to dim. I tapped it to keep it awake. The number blinked back at me. $900. I thought about how often I had skipped buying new clothes, how I'd passed on dinners with friends, how I had never gone on a real vacation. I thought about how I'd planned to start a savings account 2 years ago and never did. I thought about the nights I came home from work too exhausted to cook, too anxious to sleep, and too empty to cry. And still, the money kept going out, like I was a faucet someone else had turned on, like I didn't have the right to shut it off. I pressed the button, edit payment, then cancel recurring payment. A warning popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this automatic transfer? My thumb shook slightly. I closed my eyes and clicked yes. The silence afterward felt loud. The room didn't change, the light didn't shift, but something inside me did. It was like a string had snapped. A quiet, invisible string I hadn't noticed was choking me. That evening, my phone rang. It was Mom. I let it go to voicemail at first, then called her back an hour later. Her voice was sharp, already annoyed. She said the money hadn't come through. She sounded confused, then irritated. She asked if there had been a mistake with the bank. I told her it wasn't a mistake. I said I canceled the transfer. My voice was calm, steady. She asked how I could do this to them, to Josh, to her. She said they were counting on that money, that they needed it, that I was being cruel. I didn't answer right away. For once, I didn't rush to explain. I didn't apologize. I didn't say I'd figure something out. I just let the silence stretch. And then quietly, I said I couldn't do it anymore. She kept talking, her voice rising. But I had already made up my mind. I told her I had to go, and I ended the call. My hand shook as I placed the phone face down on the table. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilt. I felt relief. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. In and out. The air in my apartment felt a little lighter. The space felt a little more mine. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window as the sun dipped below the buildings. The world didn't fall apart because I said no. The roof didn't cave in, the earth didn't split. All that happened was that I chose myself. And I knew deep down that this was just the beginning. 2 months passed quietly. I didn't make any big announcements. I didn't call anyone to explain. I just stopped sending the money and let the silence fill the space that used to be controlled by guilt and habit. For the first time in years, my paycheck belonged only to me. The $900 that used to disappear on the 4th of every month now stayed in my account, and I watched it grow. Not fast, but enough to feel real. I opened a savings account and labeled it home. It felt strange typing that word. For so long, the word home meant a place where I felt out of place, a house I scrubbed but didn't own, a room full of voices that never heard me. Now it meant something different. I wanted a place where I could put up photos without asking, cook dinner without judgment, and sleep without someone needing something from me. I didn't know when I'd get there, but I knew I would. I booked a consultation with a mortgage advisor one morning after work. I sat in a small office with beige walls and asked questions I had never let myself ask before. What could I afford? What kind of credit score did I need? How much should I save for a down payment? The woman smiled and handed me a folder. I tucked it into my bag like a treasure and held it close the whole bus ride home. Back at my apartment, I started changing little things. I took down the old picture of Josh from the fridge. It had been there for years, held up by a magnet shaped like a sunflower. He was 12 in the photo, sitting on the back steps with a popsicle, looking up at the sky. I had kept it there out of habit, maybe out of hope. But now, looking at it, all I saw was the space I had given away. I dropped the photo in the bottom drawer of my desk, not out of anger, but because it didn't belong on display anymore. On Easter Sunday, I didn't go home. I stayed in my apartment and made pancakes. I listened to music. I called a friend and talked about anything but family. Later that night, I checked my phone and saw a public post from my mother on Instagram. It was a photo of her and Josh, with the caption, "Some children forget who gave them life." No tags, no names, but I knew exactly who it was for. I didn't comment. I didn't like the post. I didn't text her or try to explain. I just closed the app and opened my book instead. It was strange how quiet it felt inside me. Not empty, just still. A few days later, a message came from Josh. It was short, just one sentence. "You destroyed this family." I didn't open the full message. I didn't want to know what else he wrote. I just swiped left and deleted it. His number went into the block list along with Mom's. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat there, breathing slowly, like I had finally stepped out of a storm. They were angry. I understood that. But what I had started to understand more was that their anger wasn't my responsibility. I had carried their sadness, their fear, their needs for so long that I didn't know where they ended and I began. Now I was starting to see the line. My apartment was small, but it had become a kind of shelter. My own dishes in the cupboard, my own pillow on the bed. I started lighting candles in the evening, soft ones that smelled like vanilla or clean linen. I cleaned not because I had to, but because I wanted my space to feel good. I cooked simple meals and ate at the table with the window open. Sometimes I played old music, the kind Mom used to dance to in the kitchen before everything changed. One night, I stood by the window as the sun dropped behind the mountains. The sky turned pink and gold, and I held a cup of tea in my hands. The air smelled like spring. In that moment, I realized I had everything I needed. My life didn't have to be big or loud. It just had to be mine. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I'd ever have a perfect family or a house full of laughter. But I knew I would never again give everything away for the sake of someone else's comfort. I had learned the hard way that being needed isn't the same as being loved. Now, the people who only called when they wanted something were silent. The pressure to be the fixer, the helper, the invisible backbone, it was gone. In its place, there was something new. It didn't have a name yet. Maybe peace, maybe freedom, maybe just space to grow into myself. As I looked out at the fading light and felt the warmth of the mug in my hands, I knew one thing with complete clarity. I wasn't going back.